6 years ago, a little girl vanished without a trace, and the city gave up on her. But one dog didn't, and when he barked at that garbage truck, it was the beginning of a truth too big to stay buried. The morning had been quiet, too quiet for a Thursday in Easton. Detective Naomi Greer sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup as she drove through the industrial side of town. Next to her in the passenger seat sat Valor, her retired K9 partner. His graying muzzle twitched as the wind from the open window ruffled his ears. He looked calm, as always, watching. Waiting? They were just about to head back to the station when a garbage truck rolled through the intersection ahead of them. It was nothing unusual, just another city vehicle making its routine rounds. But then, Valor sat up straight. His ears perked, his body stiffened, and suddenly he barked. Naomi nearly spilled her coffee. "Easy, boy," she said, eyes narrowing. But Valor didn't stop. He barked again, louder this time. His front paws hit the dashboard, and he growled deep in his chest, staring at the back of the garbage truck like it was on fire. Naomi trusted Valor. She always had. He'd once sniffed out a buried explosive under 3 feet of concrete. He didn't bark without reason. She flicked on her lights and pulled out behind the truck, giving it a short siren chirp. The driver slowed and pulled over near the curb. Naomi stepped out, badge at her hip, and approached the truck. The driver, a middle-aged man with a tired face and orange vest, rolled down his window. "Something wrong, officer?" "My dog caught a scent," she said, nodding back at Valor, who was now whining and pawing at the car door. "Mind if I take a look at your last pickup?" The man looked confused but nodded. "Yeah, sure. We just came from a stopover on Edison Street. Rich neighborhood. Don't think there's anything in there but food scraps and old furniture." Still, Naomi climbed up to the back of the truck while the driver popped the hatch. The smell hit her first. Old meat, spoiled milk, rotting paper. But that wasn't what made her stomach turn. Valor leaped from the squad car before she could stop him and scrambled up the metal steps like a dog half his age. He nosed through bags, sniffing furiously, then froze. He let out a low whine. Naomi reached in and gently pulled apart the plastic. There it was. A child's sweater, pale pink, blood-stained and torn. Tucked beside it, wrapped in an old towel, was a small photograph. A girl with wide brown eyes and a bright smile. She couldn't have been older than 10. Across the bottom of the photo, in faded black marker, was one word: missing. Naomi's blood ran cold. She turned to the driver, who now looked pale. "Where exactly did you say you picked this load up?" He hesitated. Maplewood. Number 1432. I didn't pack it myself. Just grabbed the bins." Naomi nodded slowly and looked down at Valor, who was staring at the photo, his chest rising and falling fast. "Good boy," she whispered. "Real good boy." She didn't know what they had stumbled into. Not yet. But Valor had just reopened a case the city had tried to bury in silence. And this time, she wasn't going to let it go. Naomi sat behind her desk at the precinct, the photo of the girl resting between her hands. The edges were worn, the ink slightly smudged, but the smile on the little girl's face was still clear. She didn't have to check the system to know who she was. "Lila Tanner," Naomi whispered. The name alone brought back a wave of memories, bad ones. She remembered the press conferences, the candlelight vigils, the parents standing side by side, barely holding it together as they begged for their daughter's return. Lila had gone missing 6 years ago on a warm summer evening. She was 9 years old at the time. Her bike had been found on the sidewalk just 3 blocks from her home. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no witnesses. The investigation had stretched for months. Naomi had been part of the original task force. At first, everyone thought she'd just wandered off. Then maybe someone had taken her. But every lead dried up. No ransom note, no security footage. The trail went cold, fast, too fast. Eventually, the case was pulled from the active list. Lila was marked as presumed deceased. Naomi hated that term. It sounded so final, so sure. But they had no body, no confession, no answers, just grief. She picked up the sweater again, now sealed in an evidence bag. The blood on it was dry and dark, Someone had tried to get rid of it, but Valor hadn't let them. Her eyes drifted to the dog lying near her feet. He was resting now, but his eyes stayed on her, watching, waiting. "You remember her, don't you?" Naomi said softly. Valor gave a slow blink, like he understood. Naomi had never really stopped thinking about Lila. There were cases that stuck to your ribs, ones you couldn't shake even after years. Lila's had been one of those. Maybe it was the way her mother used to bring cupcakes to the search parties. Maybe it was the look in her father's eyes, like he blamed himself for something he couldn't fix. Or maybe it was the simple fact that a child had disappeared in broad daylight, and no one had ever been held responsible. The city had moved on. Time had dulled the urgency. Other cases took priority. People stopped asking questions. But Naomi never stopped wondering what they had missed. Now, here was proof that someone had lied. Someone had known something and stayed quiet. Maybe Lila hadn't died that summer. Maybe she'd been alive a lot longer than they thought. Maybe. She shook the thought away. Hope was dangerous in this line of work. It clouded judgment, but she couldn't help it. Valor had found that sweater for a reason. Naomi stood, grabbing the file box from the cold case room. Dust puffed into the air as she opened it. Newspaper clippings, witness statements, maps with red pushpins. She flipped through the photos until she found it, Lila at her last birthday party, candles glowing in front of her. Same smile, same eyes. "Let's find out what really happened," she said. Valor's tail thumped once against the floor. Long before Valor wore a police badge, he was a soldier. He'd been trained in the dry heat of a desert base, surrounded by barbed wire and barking commands. Valor was fast, focused, and fearless. He could sniff out explosives buried under concrete, alert his handler with just a look, and chase down danger without hesitation. The soldiers in his unit trusted him with their lives, and he never let them down. Then came the day everything changed. It was supposed to be a routine patrol down a dusty road in Syria. The sun hung low, and the heat shimmered off the ground. Valor walked ahead, nose to the dirt, ears alert. His handler, Corporal Dane Wallace, followed close behind. No one saw the bomb. The explosion ripped through the silence like thunder. The earth shook. When the dust cleared, 3 men were down. One didn't move. The other screamed for help. Valor lay nearby, his side torn open, blood pooling under him. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just stared at the sky, dazed and broken. Back at the military hospital, they did what they could. Valor's wounds were deep. A metal shard had nearly pierced his lung. The vets patched him up, but they didn't expect him to work again. Dogs like him, when they couldn't return to duty, were often quietly put to sleep. But Corporal Wallace had left strict instructions before he died. "If anything happens to me, don't let them take Valor. He deserves more." The military offered the dog to the only person willing to take him, a detective from Easton who had once served with Wallace's sister. Her name was Naomi Greer. Naomi had her own scars. She'd lost a partner in the line of duty just months before, shot during a drug bust gone wrong. She hadn't been the same since. Nightmares, guilt, silence. Her fellow officers walked on eggshells around her, unsure if she was healing or hiding. When she first met Valor, he didn't even lift his head. He just lay in the corner of the kennel, eyes dull, ears flat. His ribs showed through his fur, and his once sharp focus was gone. But Naomi saw something in him. "Hey, soldier," she whispered through the bars. "You and me? Maybe we're both still here for a reason," the shelter worker warned her. "He doesn't eat much, doesn't respond to commands. It's like he's shut down." Naomi nodded. "So have I." She took him home anyway. At first, it was rough. He didn't sleep through the night. Sometimes he would jump at loud noises or stare at the wall for hours. Naomi understood. She had nights like that too. But over time, something shifted. He started eating again. He followed her from room to room. He growled at strangers but let her brush the matted fur from his coat. One morning, Naomi found a chewed-up tennis ball on her pillow. It wasn't a bark or a wag, but it was something. They learned to trust each other, one quiet day at a time. And when Valor passed his recertification as a K9 unit, despite the scars, despite the limp, It wasn't just a win for him. It was a win for both of them. They weren't whole, but they weren't broken anymore. They were survivors. The lab results came back faster than Naomi expected. She sat in the dimly lit evidence room, staring at the printed report in her hands. The blood on the sweater was human, type AB. The fibers matched modern clothing, and the sweater's tag still had a store barcode, one that was only sold in the last 2 years. The photo? Even fresher. The ink hadn't fully set. It had been printed less than 24 hours before Naomi found it in the garbage truck. She looked again at the little girl's face. Same bright smile. Same deep eyes. Lila Tanner, missing for 6 years. Naomi rubbed her forehead. Something didn't make sense. If Lila had vanished that long ago, why were her belongings suddenly showing up now? And why in a trash bag headed to the landfill? The truck driver had said he picked up the load from Maple Heights, a wealthy neighborhood across town. Gated homes, clean sidewalks, luxury cars in every driveway. The kind of place where problems were hidden behind high fences and tight lips. But Lila had never lived anywhere near Maple Heights. Her family had been from the east side, working class. Nothing about the connection added up. Naomi stood and glanced down at Valor. He was awake now, ears up, eyes locked on her like he was waiting for something. She grabbed the evidence bags, tucked them under her arm, and whistled low. "Let's go, partner." They drove toward Maple Heights, past rows of trimmed hedges and shiny mailboxes. Naomi parked near the collection point listed by the sanitation department. She stared at the long driveway leading up to a white brick house with tall windows and security cameras on every corner. Before she could step out of the car, Valor let out a soft growl and turned his head away from the house. "What is it?" Naomi asked. He stood and placed both front paws on the door, tail stiff, eyes focused down the street. He didn't want to go toward the house. He wanted to go the other way. Naomi followed his gaze. The road curved toward the city's edge, where the neighborhoods gave way to chain-link fences and loading docks. "You smell something?" Valor barked once and pawed at the door. Naomi started the car again, following his nose. He led her straight to the edge of the industrial district, a place most people avoided unless they had business there. The air grew thick with the scent of oil and rust. Trucks passed by carrying crates and waste bins. The roads were cracked, and graffiti covered the buildings. Finally, Valor pressed his face against the window and whined. Naomi slowed and pulled over. They were in front of an old textile warehouse, now converted into a private waste transfer site. It was quiet, too quiet for a weekday. No workers, no movement. Valor hopped out the moment she opened the door. He sniffed the ground, moved in circles, then stopped, rigid, alert. Naomi looked up at the faded company sign and the heavy, locked gates. She didn't need a warrant yet, not if she was just observing. But every instinct in her body said something wasn't right. The trash wasn't dumped in Maple Heights by accident. Someone had planted it there. To mislead, to distract, or to warn. But they hadn't counted on Valor. He didn't follow lies. He followed the truth. And Naomi, she was ready to find it, no matter how dark the trail became. The abandoned textile factory stood like a skeleton from the past. Walls cracked, windows shattered, its old brickwork darkened with time and rain. Naomi parked the cruiser just outside the rusted gates. Weeds pushed through the concrete. The only sound was the soft hum of traffic far behind them. Valor jumped out of the car before she could even open her door. He didn't wait. Nose down, tail stiff, he moved with purpose, weaving between the old loading docks and piles of forgotten pallets. Naomi followed close behind, heart pounding. Every step felt heavier than the last. They reached a side door, partially open and groaning on its hinges. Naomi slipped inside, hand on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick dust, floating in the air. The factory floor was a graveyard of broken machines and tangled wires. Birds fluttered in the rafters. Everything smelled of rust and mold. But Valor didn't slow down. He crossed the room in seconds, pausing only to sniff a stained tarp and an old work boot. Then he barked, once, sharp and urgent, and began clawing at the wooden floor near a stack of collapsed crates. Naomi crouched beside him, sweeping away debris. The floorboards were loose and brittle. With a little force, she pulled one free. A rush of cold air came up from the darkness below. Valor growled, then whined, pawing frantically. Beneath the floor, nestled in a shallow space between the joists, was an old suitcase. The fabric was torn. The handle was wrapped in electrical tape. Mold had eaten through parts of it. Naomi reached in and pulled it out gently. It smelled like damp earth and time, and something else, something sour. She set it on the floor and opened it. Inside, under a dirty blanket, were 3 items: a child's diary, a bracelet with cracked pink beads, and a burner phone with a shattered screen. Naomi's breath caught. She picked up the diary first. The cover was soft purple, with faded butterflies along the edge. Inside, the writing was uneven and childlike. Lila's name was scribbled in blue ink on the first page. She flipped through carefully. There were drawings, some happy, some not. One showed a house with tall gates. Another was a room with no windows. And then there were the words, "I miss my mom. They said I can't talk about what I saw. I remember his smell, like smoke and old cologne." Naomi closed the diary slowly and looked at the bracelet. It was the kind a child would wear every day. Cheap, plastic, but personal. Some of the beads were missing, others were scratched. Then she turned to the phone. It took a minute, but she got it powered on using a portable charger from her bag. The screen flickered. The battery sat at 3%. One unread message. It was sent last night. It read, "She remembers." Naomi felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just old evidence. Someone was sending a warning. Someone knew Lila's memory hadn't been lost, and they were scared. Valor sat beside her, ears up, eyes sharp. "We're not just chasing a ghost anymore," Naomi whispered. "We're chasing someone who's still watching." Valor let out a quiet huff, low and steady. He understood. And they weren't turning back. Naomi sat in the small records room at the precinct, her laptop open, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside her. The waste collection company had dozens of employees and subcontractors. Most looked clean, ordinary men and women doing ordinary jobs. But one name kept catching her eye: Emmett Cordell. He wasn't listed as a full-time employee, just a contracted cleanup specialist hired for special pickups, quiet jobs, private ones, the kind where no questions were asked. Naomi clicked through his file. No criminal record, no complaints. Former military, honorably discharged. Worked overseas in logistics and site clearing. From the outside, he was just another guy who served and came home. But something felt off. She printed the file and laid it beside the evidence photos. Lila's sweater, the diary, the message on the phone. She remembers. Someone wanted the past to stay buried. And someone was getting paid to make sure it did. She heard a low growl. Valor was lying at her feet, still and tense. He was staring at the file on the floor. His ears were back. His lip curled slightly. Naomi frowned and reached down, running her hand along his back. "Easy, boy. What is it?" He didn't bark, just kept growling, soft but steady. Naomi stared at the printed name, Emmett Cordell. That's when it hit her. She dug through a locked drawer in her desk and pulled out Valor's old service folder, something she rarely opened. Inside were medical reports, mission logs, and a list of handlers and squad members from his unit. She flipped to the last few pages, and there it was. Cordell, Emmett, Sergeant, Explosive Disposal Unit, K9 Division. Deployed with Valor in 2013. Naomi leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Cordell hadn't just served. He had worked directly with dogs like Valor, maybe even with Valor himself. But why would a man like that end up quietly handling garbage for a private company? And why had he tried so hard to stay invisible? She pulled up recent surveillance footage from the textile warehouse. It took some time, but there he was, blurry but visible. Emmett Cordell, dumping large bags near the back gate, no gloves, no hesitation. She paused the frame and zoomed in on his face. Valor stood suddenly, hackles up, and growled louder. Naomi looked down at him, alarmed. You know him, don't you? Valor's eyes didn't leave the screen. Something deep in him remembered. Not just a face, but a feeling. Fear, danger, betrayal. Naomi looked back at the file. Cordell was too careful. No social media, no family listed. But someone with his background didn't just disappear unless they wanted to, unless they had something to hide. She started pulling more files, making calls, digging deeper. The more she looked, the worse it got. Cordell had been at 3 different facilities, tied to children's programs and foster homes, places where kids went missing and no one made noise, all neatly swept away. No evidence, no press, just gone. Naomi's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a missing girl anymore. It was a pattern, a system. And Emmett Cordell? He wasn't just part of it. He was the cleaner. It was just after midnight when Naomi woke to the sound of scratching. At first, she thought it was the wind against the windows or maybe the old pipes in the walls, but then she heard a low, broken whimper, deep and pained. She sat up fast, heart pounding. Valor was on the floor beside the couch, his legs kicking, chest rising and falling too fast. His eyes were shut, but his whole body was trembling. His paws twitched like he was running. Then, suddenly, he let out a choked bark and began to convulse. Valor! Naomi shouted, sliding to the floor. She reached him just as his body stiffened, shaking uncontrollably. Foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. His breathing was sharp and shallow. It was a seizure. Naomi wrapped her arms gently around his neck, holding him close without squeezing too hard. I'm here, she whispered. You're safe. You're safe, boy. She stayed like that for almost a minute, whispering calmly until his body slowly relaxed. His legs stopped shaking, his chest settled, his eyes opened halfway, dazed and glassy. Naomi kept her hand on his back, feeling the tremble beneath her palm. This wasn't just exhaustion. Something had triggered it. She looked over at the suitcase they had found at the warehouse. It still sat by the door, sealed now in a larger evidence bag. But even through the plastic, the air carried the scent of mold, old cloth, and something else. Faint traces of blood, maybe even fear. Valor had been fine until they found it. Naomi waited until he was resting again, then stood and pulled out his military file from the bottom of her drawer. She flipped through it, eyes scanning for any clue. There was a section she hadn't paid much attention to before, a report from a mission in Kabul, years ago. It mentioned a raid on a suspected insurgent compound located near a children's orphanage. The official record said the building had been destroyed in a fire. No survivors, no remains. It was marked as an unfortunate casualty of war. But something about it didn't sit right. Attached to the report was a note, handwritten, no signature. This was no accident. Pull the dog. He's seen too much. Naomi's eyes widened. Valor had been there. He'd been close to that orphanage. He might have even gone inside. And now, years later, they had found a child's diary, a broken bracelet, and a message that read, "She remembers." Naomi stared at the file, then at the dog lying on her floor. Valor's scars weren't just from shrapnel and gunfire. They were deeper than that. Somewhere inside him were memories buried like landmines, waiting for the wrong scent or sound to bring them back. She sat down beside him, gently brushing her fingers through his fur. I don't know what you saw, she whispered, but I believe you remember. His eyes opened slowly. They were tired, but focused. And Naomi knew without a doubt the nightmare wasn't just a dream. It was a warning. The morning was gray and quiet when the call came in. A fresh load of garbage had arrived at the city landfill. Nothing unusual, just another dump site among thousands. But Valor was already pacing before Naomi grabbed her keys. His tail stood stiff, nose pressed to the front door like he knew what waited for them. When they reached the landfill, the smell hit them first. Hot, sour, and heavy with smoke. Naomi pulled her jacket tighter around her. The workers nodded as they passed, a few recognizing her from the week before. One man pointed toward the newest section, where a truck had just offloaded a large pile, still steaming at the edges. Valor leapt out of the car the second she opened the door. He didn't hesitate. He trotted straight toward the heap of blackened trash, nose low, body tense. Naomi followed, gloves on, eyes scanning. Valor began to dig, claws scraping through melted plastic and soggy paper. He stopped suddenly and growled. Naomi dropped to her knees beside him. Buried under a layer of wet ash was a folder, edges burned, spine melted. She pulled it free and carefully opened it. Inside were photos. Some only half survived, faces burned away, others still whole. Children, boys and girls of different ages, some smiling, some looking confused, like the photo had been taken without their permission. Naomi's stomach turned. There were documents too, intake forms, notes, medical records, every page marked with a strange code and initials that didn't match any official agency she knew. These weren't old. The paper was warm, as if someone had set the fire not long ago. Valor sat beside her, tail not moving, ears turned toward the wind like he was still listening. Naomi took the evidence back to the station, her hands shaking. She wrote up the report, placed the files in a sealed bag, and requested an emergency meeting with the commissioner. The meeting lasted 6 minutes. "No, Greer," he said flatly, not even looking up from his desk. "That case was closed 6 years ago. We're not reopening it based on garbage." Naomi slammed the photo of one of the burned children on his desk. "This girl was never even listed in the system," she said. "She's not from the Tanner case. There are more kids, more victims. Someone is trying to hide them." The commissioner glanced at the image, then sighed. "I get it. You've had a rough run. You're still dealing with what happened to you and your partner." "Don't," Naomi warned. He held up a hand. "Even if you're right, we can't open this can of worms without solid names. We'd be tearing open wounds we failed to heal. The public won't like it, and neither will the mayor." Naomi stood. "So that's it?" "I'm sorry," he said, but his voice didn't mean it. Back in her car, Naomi placed the burned folder in her bag and looked at Valor in the rearview mirror. He met her eyes, calm but steady. She started the engine. "If they won't listen," she said, "then we'll go without them." And just like that, they were on their own, again. It was supposed to be a quick stop. Just 10 minutes. Naomi parked the cruiser outside a hardware store on the edge of town. She needed a few tools. Bolt cutters, a heavy flashlight, gloves thick enough to handle broken glass. She had planned to be in and out. Valor sat quietly in the back seat, his head resting on his paws. He looked calm, but his eyes followed her as she stepped out and closed the door. "I'll be right back, partner," she said. She didn't lock the cruiser. She never did when Valor was inside. No one would dare mess with him. Or so she thought. Naomi moved quickly through the aisles, her mind racing with thoughts about the burned papers, the photos, and Emmett Cordell's name echoing in her head. She was gathering pieces, but none of it made sense yet. She kept telling herself she was close, closer than anyone had ever been. Maybe too close. When she came back outside, something felt wrong. The air felt too still. The street was quiet. The cruiser looked untouched, but Valor wasn't in the back seat. Naomi froze. She rushed to the car, heart pounding, hands shaking as she yanked the door open. Empty. No broken glass, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Just a folded piece of paper on the driver's seat. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the words, scrawled in thick black marker. "Back off, or we'll finish the job this time." For a moment, Naomi couldn't breathe. The world around her blurred. Her hands clenched into fists, the paper crumpling in her grip. She looked up and down the street. Nothing. No security cameras. No witnesses. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. She shouted his name. "Valor!" No answer. She ran behind the building, checked every alley, every trash bin. She called local shelters, every vet clinic within 10 miles. Nothing. He was gone. Naomi sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it so tight her knuckles turned white. Her chest felt hollow, empty. She thought she had been the one protecting him, the one making decisions, taking the risks. But now she realized he had been watching over her the entire time, quietly, constantly, like he knew something was coming long before she did. Now she was alone, and more afraid than she wanted to admit. But fear didn't get to stay long. It twisted into something else, something sharper. Rage. They didn't just take a dog. They took her partner, her protector, her family. Naomi stared at the note again, then crumpled it and tossed it aside. "You want a warning?" she muttered. "Here's mine." She pulled out Valor's old military file, the one she'd been carrying with her since the night of his seizure. She flipped to the photo of his unit, the last known picture of them all together. Emmett Cordell was standing 2 rows back, half smiling, arms crossed. Naomi looked at his face and didn't blink. "I'm coming for you." 3 days felt like a lifetime. Naomi hadn't slept more than a few hours since Valor vanished. She'd driven through back roads, searched alleyways, knocked on doors, and called every shelter and clinic within 50 miles. No one had seen him. No one had heard a thing. Each night, she sat on her couch, staring at the photo of Lila Tanner and the half-burned files they'd pulled from the landfill. The room felt colder without him, the silence heavier. The worst part wasn't knowing if he was dead. It was not knowing if he was suffering. She never cried in front of anyone, but at night, when the world was quiet, the tears came anyway. Then, on the 3rd day, her phone rang. It was early morning, still dark. A man on the line said he'd been walking his dog near the canal just outside town when he saw something in the mud. A large dog, hurt, bleeding. He gave the location. That was all Naomi needed. She drove faster than she should have. Her hands gripped the wheel like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. The canal ran along a chain-link fence behind an old lumber yard. The water was shallow and lined with broken concrete. And there he was, Valor, lying half in the water, half on the bank, his body caked with mud and blood. His fur was torn open near his ribs, and his back leg was twisted at a strange angle, but he was breathing, barely. Naomi dropped to her knees beside him. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Valor, no, no, stay with me." His eyes fluttered open, just a little, just enough to see her. That's when she noticed what was in his mouth. A small, bloodied child's shoe. Pink, worn, the sole barely hanging on. Naomi reached out to take it, but Valor growled low in his throat and tightened his grip. He wouldn't let go. Naomi felt her heart cracking too. "You found her, didn't you?" she whispered. "She's still alive." Valor blinked slowly, his breathing uneven. She didn't waste time. She wrapped him in a towel from the back seat and placed him gently in the car, cradling his head as best she could. The shoe stayed between his teeth the whole ride. At the emergency vet, the staff moved fast. They asked questions. What happened? How long had he been like this? But Naomi could barely speak. "He was taken," she said, her voice shaking. "They left him to die, but he didn't. He came back." While they worked on Valor, stitching wounds, giving fluids, setting the broken leg, Naomi sat in the hallway clutching the shoe. It was small, too small. It belonged to someone who hadn't finished growing up. Someone still out there. Someone still waiting. Valor had risked everything to bring it back. That meant Lila was alive, and Naomi would tear the city apart to bring her home. The storm drain entrance was hidden behind a crumbling brick wall at the edge of the city's old train yard. Most people passed by it every day and never gave it a second glance. But Valor had sniffed the air when they drove past, even through the pain and the tight wrappings on his side. His ears twitched, and he let out a low, shaky growl. It was enough for Naomi. She pulled over, radioed for backup, and led a small team through the overgrown brush toward the entrance. The metal grate covering the tunnel was rusted and loose. One of the officers used bolt cutters to snap the last lock, and they pushed it aside. The smell hit them first. Dampness, mold, something sour and wrong. Naomi shined her flashlight into the darkness. Water dripped from overhead. The tunnel sloped downward into a cold, endless echo. They moved in silence. Valor walked slowly beside her, wrapped in gauze and limping, but alert. He sniffed the air with purpose. Every few steps he would stop, glance back at Naomi, then keep going. He was leading them now. The deeper they went, the worse it got. The walls were coated in grime. Rats skittered through the shadows. At one point, they passed a mattress soaked in old stains. Naomi's stomach tightened. Then they found the door. It wasn't even locked, just wedged shut with a rusted pipe. One of the officers kicked it open, and their flashlights swept across the room. A cage, made of welded steel bars and bolted to the floor. Inside, there was a mattress, a bucket, a pile of old blankets. And in the corner, curled up like a ghost, was a girl. She didn't scream when the door opened. She didn't move. Naomi stepped forward, heart pounding. The girl's hair was tangled and dirty, her skin pale. She looked about 13 now, but the face was unmistakable. "Lila?" Naomi said softly. The girl flinched, but didn't answer. Valor stepped ahead of everyone. His limp slowed him, but he made it to the cage and stopped just outside the bars. He let out a low whine and lowered his head. That's when the girl moved. She looked up slowly, eyes wide and filled with something Naomi couldn't describe. She stared at Valor for a long moment, then her lips parted and a whisper escaped. "Doggy." She stood, knees shaking, and rushed forward. The door to the cage had been forced open. She didn't stop to look at the officers. She didn't look at Naomi. She fell into Valor. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers buried into his fur, and she sobbed, not loud but deep, shaking, endless sobs like the kind that had been held in for years. Valor didn't move. He just nuzzled her gently and licked the tears from her cheek. Naomi stood still, eyes burning. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was a reunion. The sun poured softly through the hospital windows. Warmth touched the blanket wrapped around Lila's shoulders as she sat on the edge of her bed, a pen in her hand and a notebook in her lap. Her hair was cleaner now, her face fuller. The bruises had faded, and the cuts had healed. But what stood out most were her eyes, no longer hollow, but curious again. She didn't talk much, not yet. But when she did, her voice was gentle, almost like it belonged to someone else. The doctors called it progress. Naomi called it a miracle. Valor lay on a dog bed at the foot of the bed, wrapped in bandages, his breathing slow but steady. He hadn't left Lila's side since the day they found her. No one asked him to stay. He just knew. Naomi stood nearby, watching the two of them. She'd been asked to speak at the upcoming press conference. Reporters wanted her to tell the world what had happened. How the city's most haunting cold case had finally been solved. How one injured K9 had done what teams of officers couldn't. But Naomi said no. Instead, she had another idea. That afternoon, the community center filled with people, officers in uniform, doctors, teachers, families, and in the front row sat Lila, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the stage. Naomi sat beside her. Valor lay at her feet, wrapped in a fresh white bandage around his chest. His ears twitched with every sound, but he stayed calm. A child advocate stepped up to the microphone and unfolded a piece of paper. "This is a letter," she said, "written by Lila Tanner, and she asked us to share it with someone very special." The room fell silent. The woman began to read. "Dear Valor, I don't remember everything. Some things are still blurry. Some things I hope I never remember. But I remember you. I remember your eyes at the door. I remember how you didn't bark or run away when you saw me. You just looked at me like I mattered. You didn't forget me, not even after the world did. People stopped looking. They said I was gone, but you knew I wasn't. You came anyway. You were hurt, but you came. You stayed with me. You let me cry into your fur. You let me hold on when everything else felt scary. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for remembering me. I love you. Love, Lila." The woman folded the paper and stepped away. The room stayed quiet for a long time. No one clapped. No one spoke. But the air was thick with something bigger than words. Valor stirred slightly. His tail gave one slow wag. Naomi reached down and scratched behind his ears. You did good, partner. He didn't need medals, or news stories, or parades. He just needed to know he'd done what he was born to do. Outside, the world moved on, but in that room, something stayed still, peaceful, full, whole. Because Valor wasn't just a dog. He was the reason a little girl got to live, and the reason Naomi believed in hope again. Thank you for being part of this journey. If Valor's story moved you, help us honor him and others like him by giving this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of bravery, healing, and the incredible bond between animals and the people they protect.